Hi, good morning or afternoon, Master Gardener trainees. My name is Elizabeth Fichtner. I am a farm advisor with UC Cooperative Extension here in Tulare County. I work with the nut crops as well as olives and prunes. One of the benefits of having olives under my position description is it's one of those plants that's in both the home landscape and in commercial production. So it gives me an opportunity to interact with the master gardeners perhaps a little bit more often as one of the, say, field crop or agronomist farm advisors might have that same level of opportunity. So today I'm going to be talking about using the different resources that are available to you for diagnosing plant diseases or insect problems, and even some of those non-biological issues, abiotic causes of maladies on plants. And there's a number of resources that are available through UC, but then there's stuff that's available outside of UC. And so I'm going to take you through, the kind of things that you'll think about, the questions that you'll ask to use the resources to your advantage. And so, and I'm going to give you a bunch of examples from just my work in the field as well. So for starters, I'm going to take a very, very common plant disease. It's fire blight, and once you know it, you know it. And every year in the spring, we see fire blight on the Bradford pears and apple trees, ornamental pears as well. It's so common. It's a bacterial disease that infects through the flower buds. And the trees look bad, and every year I feel like at least one person asks me, hey, what happened to the Bradford pears? And so as master gardeners, you'll probably be asked that too. So I'm going to go through some of the methods that you would use to diagnose this before you just know it by rote memorization. And also, I'm going to point out one of the stumbling blocks that you can face when you're diagnosing these problems. So what you'd first do is ask a bunch of questions. And I'd start by always identifying the plant. And in this case, it's Bradford pear. Then identify the symptoms. I'm going to try to use these tools to illustrate things on PowerPoint. This symptom is called flagging. And that's where you get dieback of an individual branch. And dieback means the death or necrosis comes from the apex down the stem. Okay, in the situation with this disease, the pathogen enters through flower buds. And so when it flowers, the bacteria gets into the plant, and the mortality goes down the stem. This is called flagging when you have individual branches that are affected. Also, consider the environment. When does this happen, and in what years? When we have a wet spring, you get fire blight, and so that is just a commonality here. So once you've identified these issues, Bradford pear, dieback, wet spring, then you go on to ask, what could this disease be? So as a master gardener, I think your first step would be going to the UC IPM website, and I'd start with this home garden turf landscape pests place to click. And then you can come up here and you get to plant diseases down here at the bottom. So now we're in the landscape plants. Basically, we're thinking about ornamentals, things that people have in their yards. You'll see this picture here. It clearly looks like fire blight. So if you select trees and shrubs, seems like logical, right? Trees and shrubs. You got a Bradford pear with disease. Click there. But you end up with a dead end, okay? It's not going to get you to fire blight. And don't give up and don't get frustrated because there's a whole nother box here. Fruit trees, berries, nuts, grapevines. If you go there and you ask a little bit different set of questions, not ask about Bradford pear, but think what's related to Bradford pear. Because the plants that are of the most economic value are the ones that have more data on them. And so if you think, gosh, is this the genus Pyrus, family Rosaceae? Is it related to pear? Is it related to apple? And if you go that route, you will end up, let me see if I can click forward, coming to apple and fire blight. And you'll say, oh, fire blight, yes, I learned about that in my Master Gardener training class. It's caused by Erwinia amylavera, an iconic textbook pathogen. And huzzah, you found the disease. You go to the IPM information, you read about the pathogen, the life cycle, and you look at pictures and you're like, yeah, that's exactly what it is. Perfect, you got your answer. But had you gone down the trees and shrubs route, you wouldn't have found it. So just be open to kind of thinking a little bit outside the box. Look for related plants, and maybe you'll get there. And I'm going to give you another example. So example number 2, this is on olives. I tend to know more about olives than a lot of other plants just because I work with them. Say you receive an olive branch with a gall. Lots of things make galls, right? We know insects can make galls. Herbicides can make galls or stem swellings because they're plant growth regulators. Pathogens can make galls. Nematodes can make galls. So we have a lot of different options. And if you go through the fruit trees, berries, nuts, and grapevines area, you get a dead end again, because I guess olives aren't in there. Now, if you click on the trees and shrubs area, you'll get a diagnosis. So when you go through the trees and shrubs, you go to olive tree, you'll see olive knot, and you'll think, oh, yeah, that makes sense. And then you find the pathogen, Pseudomonas avastanoi. And when you click on that, it says download PDF. And boy, am I happy that you'll download that PDF because I wrote it. And so I can pat myself on the back because I kind of am really proud of it. And not because of my writing, but because one of my friends from graduate school is a fabulous botanical illustrator. And I had her do the life cycle for this disease. And so we have a beautiful botanical illustration of this life cycle for olive knot. And so in this case, going down the fruit tree route within the UC IPM website would not have done you any good. You had to go through the trees and shrubs, basically treating it as an ornamental and not a fruit tree. So my thoughts on this and using these UC resources, they're fabulous, but you need a lot of input. So ask a lot of questions. So if someone has a sample for you, ask where is it from? What kind of landscape is it in? When did the symptoms begin? Was it around bloom, right after bloom? Was it in the fall? Were the symptoms there last year? What's the distribution of the symptoms? Is it growing or is it staying the same? Is it in one plant? Is it in all plants? Is it clumped? What's the history of the site? I'm going to give you some examples as to how these questions can lead you to the answers. So here's another scenario I have. This is from a home landscape, and I don't do site visits to home landscapes, but this tree happened to be in one of our former county director's yards. And he said, Elizabeth, I've got this problem with my olive tree. So I knew it was in a yard, and I knew that because I knew him, I could go there and check it out. And it's no big deal. But he told me, oh, it's got this black stuff on it. I didn't know what that was. But I knew it was in a yard. And so I kind of figured it was probably getting over-irrigated. So when I looked up black scale, I saw that the factors that promote black scale are a dense tree canopy, like this is one in a commercial orchard where I found black scale, and cool summer weather. Well, the year I got that call from my former county director, it was a cool summer. We had a really cool spring, a cool summer, and I knew in a landscape, He wouldn't have a dense tree canopy because he probably would have had it pruned and it would look nice. But I thought, wow, if that's in the middle of an irrigated lawn, then it would stay cool and humid. So when I went to the site to look at it, sure enough, it was kind of as I envisioned. It was a well-manicured tree, but it was in an irrigated lawn. I could tell that that was not a neglected lawn. So when you imagine those sprinklers going on, it would be just perfect for black scale development. So this is a kind of scenario where, okay, in this case, I did go and see it because I knew the guy. But, normally I don't do house calls, for example. But you, as a master gardener, could ask the clientele, well, what kind of environment is it in? Oh, is there a lawn? Is it irrigated? Do you have sprinklers? Okay, does it stay really humid? You could ask, is it on the north side of the house, the south side of the house? So you get an idea of whether it's in sun or shade. And that way you can, in your mind, put together a scenario that allows you to envision the environment that that tree or plant is in. Okay, this is another one of my kind of favorite farm calls. And it's really sad to say it's a favorite farm call because that's just almost cruel, to have a disease that's so destructive and me to call it a favorite, but it really is. So this is an olive planting near the coast. It's actually at the Santa Ynez Mission, which is near Solvang, California. This mission has an active parish. It's not a state park. So it has an active parish, and the parishioners all donated money to put in this olive plantation. They had a goal. One was they donated the money in memory of loved ones, etc. So there's a plaque, that the tree is donated in memory of, and there might be 50 names on it. So it's just heartbreaking then to look down at this planting and see all of the dead trees. These were oil olives. They were planted in super high density, which equals a super high price of planting. They're on trellises, and high tree density means a lot of trees per acre, which means a lot of money. And the trees died, and they replanted it twice, and they didn't know what was wrong. So the first question that I asked, being that I'm an olive person, was, what is the history of the site? What was here before the olives? And there was a reason I was asking that, and it's because I knew that olive is a host for verticillium wilt. And that's a plant disease, a fungal pathogen that nearly decimated the pistachio industry, and it's a very bad disease on olives as well. And sure enough, they went through their records and they told me, gosh, the prior crops were tomatoes. And tomatoes are a host of verticillium. And I thought, oh goodness, I bet this is verticillium, because verticillium will survive decades in the soil. So this is the mission. They actually wanted to harvest that olive oil, those olives, to produce oil and sell it in their gift store, to contribute towards the upkeep of this historic site. So it's not that easy, though, to figure out what the problem is if you're not super familiar with olives or tomatoes. So in this situation, if you went to vegetables and melons, knowing that there was tomatoes in there, you could cross-reference what pathogens are on the tomatoes and melons and what pathogens are on the olives, and then figure out what's similar between the two. And if you imagine this as well, you're going to be looking for something that's in the soil, because it's where you plant it in the ground and it dies, right? So if you look at this vegetables and melons, imagining tomatoes here, and then you go down here and you see verticillium wilt. That's a major problem on tomatoes, and you'll read about it in the UCIPM website, and you'll see, gosh, it can survive in the soil for 10 or more years. I wonder if that killed the olives. So I cross-referenced that with the diseases of tomatoes and that of olives. And sure enough, it's a pathogen of both. And we did do diagnostic tests. The mission's historical committee collected soil samples. They brought them to a private lab, and the sclerotia, the pathogen survival structure, was found in the soil at levels that were high enough to cause mortality, disease and mortality of those olive trees. And unfortunately, in that scenario, really the only option that they have is planting something else. And that was a huge economic loss. In reality, since that was a big enough scale to be a commercial planting, they should have tested for verticillium prior to planting the olives at that site. So as master gardeners, you're going to become very familiar with the most common things. And every once in a while, you're still going to get stumped. But you'll have samples that come at you regularly every year, and you're just going to know what they are. Fire blight on the Bradford pear is going to be one of them. But you're going to get the blossom end rot on tomato, and you're going to end up with the viral diseases on tomato and fungal diseases on cucurbits. And this on the right is nematodes, like root knot nematode on perhaps tomato. And you'll just become so familiar that you won't need these resources. Now, one that I experienced when I moved here, because I'm from the Northeast, so I don't know all the stuff that we have here. And I was shocked at how bad the chlorosis was on gardenia. And I looked at the ones in my yard, they look horrible. In fact, I pulled some of them out because I just was frustrated. So one thing that the Master Gardener training is going to give you is the language that you need to describe the symptoms. Now, this is not a pest and it's not a disease, but if you look at the leaves, you can explain this chlorosis as being an interveinal chlorosis. So I'm trying to use my pointer here. So between the veins, you have this chlorotic area, and the veins themselves, however, remain dark green. So we call this interveinal chlorosis. So if you go to the trees and shrubs site within the home, garden, turf, and landscape pests, and you click on gardenia, it'll say in there that they suffer from mineral deficiencies. Iron deficiency is an example. But you'll notice that there is no photo. You can't click on that and get your answer. But if you Google iron deficiency on gardenia and just write that in your Google search engine, you get tons of photos of iron deficiency on gardenia. So here's a situation where the combination of just doing a Google search and using the IPM website and your skills as a master gardener to be able to understand that that looks like a mineral deficiency and realize that that's called interveinal chlorosis, you end up with huzzah, your epiphany moment where you've got it. You've got your diagnosis. This is iron deficiency on gardenia. And it's caused actually by lime in the soil. It's kind of a complex thing to mitigate. So the next part of my talk is exciting to me because it's something I wanted to look up myself and I don't know much about. I am not a techie person. I am a Luddite. So I wanted to look up some of these new techniques and tools that you can use to ID plants and plant diseases. And one thing that I struggle with landscape plants is they're so diverse. There's so many different species out there, and you can't know everything. So I looked at some of these apps to see if we can get help with IDing plant diseases. And one of the best ones that I found, and I don't want to like advocate for one or another because there's so many, and there's new ones being developed all the time. I like this one called Leaf Snap. It uses this visual recognition software to ID these tree species, and you can browse for species that are identified near your location. It's cool because the database helps recognize leaves, flowers, and fruit. Now, here's the glitch. It was developed by the Smithsonian Institute, Columbia University, and University of Maryland. So it's really good at stuff on the East Coast and particularly the Northeast, not so good at California. However, I did go to their website and they are expanding it to the entire continental USA and the UK. So this is going to be improving over time. And if you look at their platform online, it's really nice. They have photos of the leaves, they have the flowers and the fruit. And look up here, they've got Northeast US, New York, Washington, D.C., Canada. So it's a really, really neat database that helps you ID plants. The one that I'm using right now is called iNaturalist. Now, don't let the name iNaturalist disappoint you because this is not just good for natural areas. I've been using it in my garden. And, you know, I'll be sitting there at the McDonald's drive-thru with my kids screaming at me in the car, and I'll say, gosh, I really like that, you know, succulent there, and I'll use the app while I'm waiting in line to figure out what the plant is that's, you know, at the drive-thru window. It's also really good at IDing birds and snakes and insects. And so it's a very valuable tool. And for master gardeners, I think it's good for identifying the plants and insect pests. It gathers crowdsourced information from your location, and it works on cultivated plants. So it's not just natural areas. This is a lot better for the West Coast, and in fact, it was partially developed by the California Academy of Sciences in conjunction with the National Geographic Society. And the best part is that it is free. So one thing that I think is of value is you can tap captive. It's like captive versus a native plant. And so almost everything that I've been looking at is captive or a cultivated plant. And then you take a picture through the app, and you'll see I'm not the most adventurous gardener because I have really boring stuff like coleus and dusty miller in my yard, but I like them. So, I mean, what am I going to say? So I thought, okay, I'm going to vet this app for the master gardeners, and I took a picture of the coleus. And sure enough, it gives you a bunch of options, see, of what it thinks it could be. And you look at it and you're like, oh, it looks best like this one. And then you click on coleus, and coleus pops up. And then you can upload that into the system, and basically other people can confirm your identification of it. And in fact, I was playing with this, and I did one of my Phalaenopsis orchid, and some guy wrote in, yes, this is a Phalaenopsis, and I thought, oh my God, I feel like a total idiot, because of course it's a Phalaenopsis, but I mean, he doesn't know that I might be a plant person, so it doesn't matter. I also tested it with my Dusty Miller, just because I wanted to see if it worked, and sure enough, it works, and I can pick Dusty Miller, and using the app, you know, you can get a lot of information, including the geographic distribution of the plants. So another thing out there is that there are new apps that are used just for plant disease diagnostics. And one of them is called Plantix, and it's supposedly being pitched as a diagnostic app for farmers, gardeners, and everybody working with agriculture. But I think this has really good potential, and I don't want to put it down because it's pretty amazing. I looked at it through the internet and YouTube videos, you know, that users have used, and also the developers. It's I think it's for Android only, and you can buy it through the Google Play Store, which I don't know how to use because maybe I don't have a Google account. I don't really know how that works. It is free. It includes diseases and pests. Now, some of the reviewers suggest that it needs work. I would think that it needs work because, as we've observed just using the UC resources, sometimes you have to think a little bit outside the box and ask the right questions and sort of attack these things from different angles. So I would keep my eyes open for more of these options in the future, because I think this artificial intelligence technology is just improving over time. So back to this iNaturalist, it's just these different apps work very similarly. I've noticed with iNaturalist, if you look on the map, if you go somewhere near a high school, there's tons and tons of reports. And I'm assuming that's probably because the high school teachers are having the students use these apps in their biology classes or ag classes. So I went to, geographically, I went to the Bravo Lake Botanical Garden to see what was reported there. And for example, someone has a grasshopper find in the botanical garden. And then you look and you see what's in their database, and you can check, you know, their own identification, and it works really well. So for example, here's the Bravo Lake Botanical Garden in Wood Lake, and you'll notice, see, there's a lot of different finds here. And the different colors represent different, let's say, categories. And I can't remember which is which. I know the blue has to be a bird because it's in the middle of the lake. So blue must be birds, yes. So if you go here, see, this is a blue, someone found a bald eagle. Let's see, red is insect, and green are plants. There you go. And so this is really neat. Like I said, you can do plants and animals, and you can also see all the different things that were found at a given area. So it's that crowdsourced information concept. So my take-home message for you guys is that context means a lot. So it's not just what is this, but you know, you want to know a lot of things. The environment, what was there before, what other things are there. So I'm going to leave this talk with an example from my farm call just last week, where context means a lot. So I was looking at this walnut orchard, and it has a lot of, it has a really thin canopy. The trees don't look good. But the neighbor's orchard is a mature sur block with really great canopy density. You know, you don't see much light going to the orchard floor, which leads me to think that the problem here in the ailing orchard is probably not soil related, because the neighboring orchard's doing well. So it seems to me it's probably management related. And then if you look here, the cover crop is lush, and if you auger down 3 feet, the soil is moist, but I didn't find any roots stuck in the auger. So I start asking other questions. Well, are the trees stressed? We pressure bombed and the trees are stressed, but yet the soil is moist. Well, why would that be? It suggests that there might be a root issue. Well, where are the roots? Then you ask the site history, and I'm looking at the irrigation and I see, it looks like there's micro sprinklers, but gosh, it looks like it might have been flooded at one time. Just there's berms, etc. And so I asked that, and sure enough, they switched from flood irrigation to micro sprinklers. And that's hard for the trees to adjust to. And then I'm wondering, well, if the soil is moist and I don't see roots, well, is there a hard pan? Are the roots down below some hard pan and they're stuck and they can't get water, and that's why the trees might be stressed? And so now I've asked the grower, hey, can we bring in a backhoe so we can take and do a backhoe pit and just see what's going on in the soil profile? Because they don't know if the soil was ripped at planting. So I really just don't know what's going on, 4 feet below the surface. So this is a kind of situation where, you walk into the site and you don't know the answer. So you go through a whole bunch of things that you try to do to figure out what's happening. And you compare with what's going on in the neighbor's orchard as well. So I would say gather context and perspective, think outside of the box, look for underlying predisposing conditions, and use all tools available. Use the UC resources, but don't be afraid of using Google. don't be afraid of using these new apps. I think they're pretty cool, particularly for plant ID. I think that they're great for getting to the genus level, and then you can use Google and find the species level. You can probably get to species by just using the internet once you get to the genus. So it's a really great tool.